Thank you for joining me for another edition of Let's Talk TCI Real Estate. As usual, I invite you to please like and share the page, share this video with anyone that you know will be interested in hearing what I am speaking about today. Your participation is always appreciated. So if you have any questions, please feel free to include those questions in the comment sections. If you have any comments, your comments are also welcome because we would like to hear your experience about your closing, the closing process if you have purchased before. Of course, this information is for the benefit of all of us so that we can be educated about the process. So your comments are appreciated. And I look forward to those comments. As usual, I will ask you wherever you're listening in from, just give us a shout out and let us know where you are listening in from. So today's edition, I will be speaking about the closing process in a real estate transaction. There are a number of different topics or questions that may come about in reference to the closing process. So I have managed to break it down into various sections to make it easier to understand and to trace along with me. All right, so I'm going to get right into it. But again, I would like to say it's only a short show because there's only so much we can talk about a closing on a transaction. Unless you have a question that makes it even more engaging, please submit those questions. But I'm going to do my best to be straight to the point, to be as clear as possible so that you may be able to understand the process when we talk about closings in a real estate transaction. And believe me, these are questions we get all the time when closing on a property, especially if you are looking for real estate now. I think this is a really good show for you so that you can understand the process. All right. So I'm going to just start by just giving a little definition about when I talk about the closing, what I am referring to. So the closing is the phase in the real estate selling process when money and documents are transferred in order to transfer ownership of the property to the buyer. So that's what I'm talking about when we talk about the closing. So we're talking about that one of the part of that end result of this real estate sales transaction. So one of the common questions we often ask in the real estate industry is, do you have to be on island for the closing? So the answer to that is no. If you are not a resident of the island, you do not have to be on the island for closing. All right. If you are a resident, you still do not have to be present at the closing either. Okay. The attorneys, they would set a date to meet and exchange these final documents on this closing date. If you are not using an attorney, then you would have to show up to exchange these documents where necessary on your own behalf. However, I highly recommend that you get an attorney to assist with this process. Okay. For non-residents, anything that has to do with the closing, once you are in correspondence with your attorney will send you all of those documents via courier beforehand so that they can be on island for the actual closing date. But of course, it is your personal choice if you want to be on island for the closing date, but you do not have to be on island. This is a question we are often asked. We even have residents, you're going on vacation and they're concerned, oh, I've already booked my vacation and now we have a closing date. Yes, you booked your vacation, but you do not have to be on island for the closing if you is not able to do so. Your attorney will represent you and ensure that everything is in order for the closing date. Okay? What is a standard closing time? Whenever you're preparing an offer, this is one of the questions that would normally be asked on that offer agreement. You know, what closing date are you looking at? So normally you can look at around 30 days for a closing. However, there are a number of factors that you should consider when setting or determining your closing date as a purchaser. For example, if it's a cash deal or financing, your time frame may differ. With cash deals, you can close on a transaction much faster than you can when it comes to financing. All right. And especially if with this cash deal, there are no financing conditions that have to be met. I've actually done a transaction in 6 days with a closing that's closed in 6 days. Again, it was a cash deal and there were no conditions that had to be met. However, like I said before, it all depends on exactly what conditions are in the offer and if it's straightforward or not. In regards to financing, for example, you will need to take into consideration all the things that the bank would need to have done in order to get that loan or mortgage to approve. For example, banks would ask for an appraisal to be completed, which can take a few days, and depending on the workload of the appraiser, it may take a bit longer. So you need to take into consideration the time needed for that appraisal to be completed. And once that appraisal is completed, remember, now your application with the bank is going to be submitted for review and approval along with that application and that along with that appraisal that is needed for the bank. So because of this, remember, you won't be able to close within that 30-day time frame. Instead, you may be looking for that 30 days to get your financing. And then once everything else goes smoothly, you will be looking at another, say, 2 weeks to get the closing done because it's you're dealing with all the processes that the bank would have to go through. All right. So just to reiterate in short form, if you're doing a cash deal, you can close in 6 days, but standard, you're looking at 30 days. If you're doing financing, you need to consider that 30 days plus an additional time frame after you get that approval from the bank. All right. Another scenario is that if you are doing in-house financing, say an owner allow you to finance a property. So instead of you're going through the bank, that particular seller may say, okay, I'll give you an opportunity to have financing through me. Then, and just say in this instance, you say, well, I don't have all my cash up front, but I need to do 3 installments. So in this case, your closing date could be set for at the end of that final payment installment. So on your preliminary agreement or your offer form, instead of an actual closing date, you would actually have something to the effect as such, closing within a time frame subject to the final payment being made, because definitely you cannot close on that property until or you should not be closing on that property until you have made that final payment. And remember, supposedly it's a 3-month period. So that means from the time that offer start, your closing date is maybe 3 months later. All right. So as an individual, you need to consider exactly what situation you are in, and that will be able to best determine what closing date that you are looking for. But for someone who is looking to do a quick transaction, yes, you can have a quick closing date. For someone who is looking for bank financing or who may have some other arrangement with the vendor or the seller, then your closing date may be a bit longer. All right. So those are things you have to think about. So then next thing is, what happens if the closing date reaches and you are not ready to close? The purchaser can request an extension on the closing date, but it will be up to the vendor to agree or disagree. Sometimes this happens whenever, for example, you are doing a financing deal. You may have put in your offer that you would have taken 30 days. And by some means, some way, something may have gone wrong during the financing period, and you need an additional 1 week or 2 weeks to get that financing approved. So obviously that's going to push back your financing time to be approved, as well as it is going to push back your closing date. In this case, if that owner see that you are diligently working towards the financing, then he would most likely be in agreement with extending your closing date. But for some reason, if, for instance, you do not get financing and you have not proven or shown to be where you were trying to get the financing, the owner does have the right to say, I no longer want to move forward with this transaction and I want to go with another offer. And that's why you have to be very vigilant in terms of making sure that you meet your conditions and that you try to do your best endeavors to get your financing in a timely manner and do what you need to do to make sure that the transaction works. All right. Also, if you are already in a binding contract, the sales and purchase agreement, and if there is any, like you say, minor setback, most times an amicable decision can be taken where both parties can agree to extend the closing dates. And your attorney will work on your behalf in order to get these closing dates changed and extended. All right. So the short answer to it is that, is it possible to extend the closing date once it has been set? Yes, it is possible to extend the closing date. Right. The other thing is closing documents. What are some of the closing documents that you will be looking for? The closing documents may vary, depending on if it's a land transaction or if it's a house transaction, commercial building. These are different factors that you will have to take into consideration when you talk about closing documents. But I just wanted point out three specific ones that is common among most transactions. So you have a survey certificate. This would be a survey map ensuring that there are no buildings or structure on the vacant land that is not a part of the sale. And what I would like to actually do is just to share my screen just for one quick minute, just to actually show you what I am talking about. So what we have here is an example of a survey certificate. And I know you may have heard about this over and over and over, but it is so important to bring this up time and time again, just so you truly understand what it is about. So like I said, this is one of the closing documents you could be looking at, a survey certificate. This is just an example of a plot of land in the Blue Hills area, okay? You notice here, if you can see hopefully where the mouse is, you will see two little rectangle shape. This is actually showing you where the actual buildings are on this plot of land, okay? Also at the various points, you actually have your boundary numbers to point out how many boundary markers is associated with this property. And also you have along here the measurements to give you what's your depth, width, height of your lot, just to show you the measurements to know exactly what you are buying, and just a little area about what's going on, right? So this is showing 147 feet of frontage and it's showing all these pins. Why am I showing you this again? Whenever you are closing on a transaction, especially if it's a vacant land, also if it's a home, you want to ensure that you have one of these survey certificates, so that if there is an issue where, for example, say this building was not here, but it was on this line, this will give you an indication. This is something that will tell you, okay, your closing may have to be delayed until you get this sorted out. So either the person will show an encroachment and the person will have to remove the structure or get it resolved. Right? So this survey certificate is very important when it comes to the end process of your transaction. Also, it allows you to verify where your property starts and where your property stops. Sometimes you are taken to a property to show you exactly where it is, and you may not remember when you go back to the property. So this survey certificate acts as a verification of your boundary lines from start to finish. All right. So this is very important. And sometimes when you are doing the transaction on your own, again, this is why I'm not just, saying it's always good to have an attorney involved, because they are going to make sure that you get all of these documents in preparation for the closing. You don't want to close on a property and then come back and say, "Oh, well, I'm not still sure where my property is." This is what the boundaries survey certificate allows you to know exactly the start, finish, and all the corners of your lot, just in case there may be any issues involved. All right. So this is just an example to show you how the certificate looks, just to establish, to make sure all these boundaries are in place. All right. So yeah, so one of the closing documents that we're thinking about is, like you say, the survey certificate, survey map, ensuring that there are no buildings or structures on the vacant land that is not a part of the sale. The other thing is you're thinking about a letter of undertaking from the bank. This letter guarantees that once registration of the property is completed with the Turks and Caicos government, that the bank would release or transfer the balance of the purchase price to the vendor's attorney. And also, you're going to be thinking about your transfer documents, which will be given. This is the most important document to ensure that the property is registered with the Turks and Caicos government and the owner's names are transferred, right? Again, it's always good to have an attorney involved in this process for your protection and also to ensure that the transfer is done correctly and in a timely manner. I do know of instances where persons have purchased a property, have not decided to use an attorney, and the transfer was not completed only because they didn't really understand the significance of having the transfer done in a timely manner. And in one case, they were not able to find the transfer documents after a while, and they never followed up on the situation. So the transfer document is very important. Even if it's signed by the vendor and the purchaser, if it's not lodged with the Turks and Caicos government for the transfer to be complete, you still do not own the property. All right. So that's very important information to know. Okay. Another very important thing to know is, does registration happen on closing date? No. Most places in the world, some registration does happen on closing date. In the Turks and Caicos, the registration does not happen on the closing date. You must allow at least 14 to 21 days for registration of the final documents, right? Now, the registration can happen within less days than that. However, 14 to 21 days is a standard time frame that is set to ensure that this registration is completed. So for sellers, this information is important so that you are aware that you are not getting the funds on the same date. The money is held in an escrow account where your attorneys will hold on to those funds until confirmation of the registration, right? Just let me repeat that again. So once everything happens on the closing date, the closing documents are transferred. If you are selling your property, no, you will not be getting those funds on that date. The attorney responsibility is to keep those funds safe in an escrow account, and where they will make sure that after the property is registered, then all funds are released to the respective persons. Okay. When it comes to a home, if you close on a deal with a house, yes, your keys can be given over. The purchasers can receive their home, even though the registration is not completed. So that's something else to think about if you are selling a property. That's a conversation you can have with your attorney. If you're selling a house and you close on a deal, remember the property hasn't been registered in the new owner's name. However, the keys would be handed over. So that's a conversation you can have with your attorney. Like I said, another good reason why you should choose to have an attorney to assist you with the closing. And I also want to bring this point up. If you have applied for the homeowner's policy that the government is currently working along with residents of the island, registration may take a little longer. The owners, the person who's selling their property, will have to be prepared to wait even a little longer, perhaps, than the 21 days standard 21 days for final registration of this property. It makes no sense just giving all the flowery stuff. You need to understand exactly what you are getting yourself into when you decide to buy or close on a property, right? So anyone who is applying for the government stamp duty exemption through the homeowner's policy, of course, it is a good thing to apply for, but you have to understand that the final registration may take a little bit longer because there is a process that it will have to go through. Remember, it has to be gazetted and it has to also be signed off from understanding by cabinet. So a process the normal registration is 14, 21 days. Because it has to go through a number of steps, registration may take a little bit longer. So for someone who's selling, that's also a conversation you should have with your attorney so that you will be prepared to wait for any additional days for this registration to take place. All right. And I thought to mention that because I've had one or two transactions in that regard, and it was just a reminder for those out there who are selling. If the purchaser says that they are getting a stamp duty waiver or exemption because of the policy, you have to be prepared to wait a little bit longer for registration to take place. Closing costs. I'm almost done. So closing costs. Of course, some of your closing costs, different closing costs. We have your stamp duty is always the number one. This is a percentage of the purchase price, and it is less on the sister islands compared to Providencia Islands. I've spoken about stamp duty percentages before. It's usually you're looking from 0% up to 10%, and on the outer islands, you're looking from 0 up to 6% on the outer island. So if you want to take advantage of a reduced stamp duty, then purchasing on like North Caicos, South Caicos, Grand Turk is a good choice because you have to pay less stamp duties compared to Providencia Islands. But stamp duty, of course, is a one-time fee, and it's based on the price of the property that you are purchasing. All right. And then you have your legal fees. Of course, as agents, we do have attorneys in which we can suggest to you that we work along with. That we can provide recommendations to you to help you find a good fit. We have some great attorneys on island, and we do have a great selection to choose from. Some attorneys may choose by the hour, while others charge a flat rate, and some may choose a percentage of the transaction. All right. But don't be afraid to contact any of them or reach out to your real estate agent because they do have persons that they can recommend and get you in contact with so that you are able to make an informed decision and also be able to have a smooth closing process. So main closing costs you want to think about is your stamp duty and your legal fee. There's a transfer fee of $25. Okay. And last thing I would like to talk about is closing statements. For someone who is selling your property, your attorney can provide you with a closing statement so that you can see all your costs up front. Also, at successful registration, an attorney will also send you a closing statement showing you all fees that will need to be paid out before they pay out any fee out of the funds received and that is being held on your behalf. Okay, so that's really information that you will need to know and understand about closing in a nutshell. If you have any questions, feel free to leave them in the comment section. After the show, I will definitely go over them and answer your questions. But if just to reiterate, because I know sometimes I speak fast, I do speak fast sometimes. And of course, this is something I do every day. So sometimes I don't realize I'm going too fast for you. But basically, you need to know your closing time can depend on the type of transaction you are trying to do. If it's a cash deal, if it's a financing deal, it makes a difference. You do not have to be on island to close on a property. And definitely, if you are doing a transaction and you see where you are not able to close within the time frame that you had hoped to close in, please communicate with your real estate agent, communicate with your attorney, and let them assist you in finding a solution so that both you and the vendor could be successful in closing the property. And I will say this to you, that communication is key in everything that we do. And we have, do not be intimidated by your agents. Do not be intimidated by your attorneys, because we have some good ones and they have been doing a good job. They will help you navigate to find out how you can maneuver around it. So you just communicate, you be honest, and everyone will help to find the solution to help you close on that dream vacant lot, condo, home, commercial building, whatever real estate purchase that it is that you are trying to accomplish and achieve. So that's really it for today. Thank you to all of you who have listened in. I know it's short, but I really wanted to talk about the closing process with you in that regard today. If you have any questions, leave it in the comment section. And until next time, I would say to you, enjoy the rest of your day, stay safe, and remain blessed. Thank you for watching.
The views, thoughts, and opinions expressed on this show belong solely to Let's Talk TCI Real Estate and not that of Keller Williams TCI or any of its affiliates. Any action you take upon the information provided on this show is strictly at your own risk, and Let's Talk TCI Real Estate guest or host will not be liable for any losses and damages in connection with the use of the material. I am not an investment advisor, broker, or dealer.